Hello, in this video I would like to talk about Python modules. Now, Python modules are another way to go through and group code together. We've seen functions, we've seen classes. Modules are just another way of doing that. You've actually used modules before, such as the pickling module. And the way it works is you import a module, which is another file that contains code. So let's go ahead and take a look up at my little diagram, my notes here. Let's say I want to go through and I want to create a script file. I'm going to call it data processor py. So data processor py. And I would go through and I'd make a new module, like module 9 here. Make a new file. Call it data processor, and then I'd start putting in the code. And the code I'd want to put in there would be, of course, a little preface here at the top, and maybe a class that would allow me to work with files. So I'll make a file class, which allows me to process data using files. And I'll have a couple fields, such as the file name and maybe the text data I want to write to the file. In my constructor, you can pass me in a file name. If you don't pass me one, I'll use the default. You can give me some text data. If you don't, I'll just use an empty string. And I'll fill up the file name and text data with that in the constructor. Now, by now, you're starting to read the constructor code and the fields and the class, and it's not so scary. Whereas 3 weeks ago, this would have been big, scary stuff. Hopefully now you can see that just a little bit more time, you'll get very used to this, and modules are going to be that way too. So that was my constructor. I'll go ahead and make property procedures for the file name. There's my getter and my setter. And here's one for the text data, my getter and my setter. And my methods, I have one called save data, which opens the file, whatever file name that is set, writes whatever text data that is currently in there, and closes the connection. As far as get data, it opens the file and reads the code into this text data and then closes the connection. So it doesn't do a whole lot, but it works with the file. You give me some text you want to store, I'll write it if you ask, or I'll read the text out and put it in the text data variable for use later. If you call the toString method, I'll give you back the file name, comma, whatever data I have in the text data. And of course, the implied toString method that comes with Python's inheritance actually just goes ahead and calls my customized one. So by now you're probably reading that code pretty easily. Hopefully it's making more sense. If not, just take it a little slow. I think you'll find that this is all stuff that we've learned how to do over the course of the last 8-9 weeks. Okay, so sorry about my voice. I'm still kind of under the weather right now. I'll go ahead and paste this in for my little data processor. And this actually is a module. This is a Python code module. A Python code module is just a file that you create with code in it. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's actually no real starting point here. There's no point where I asked to create a object file. A file object. So I've got the class defined, but there's no code that actually creates an object from the class. And all my methods, my properties, are inside of it. So while this file does exist and it has code in it, there's no interactive code. It just waits to be used later on. What we need to do is we need to go through and create another file, another Python script, that will call it and see if it works. When you do this, when you just make a kind of a throwaway script for this purpose of testing a Python module, this is referred to as a test harness. That's just kind of a slang in the industry. You're hooking it up like you're harnessing a cart to a horse, and you're going to test it, so it's a test harness. And the way it works is you make the file, you put it in the same folder as your module, and then you import it. Now, if the module's in a different folder altogether, you can still make it work. But the easiest way to make these work are put the files all together in the same folder. So I would I would go through and I'd take code like this, and I'd put it in a module, like my little test file here. My test file is in the same folder. I look at it here. There's, oops, that shouldn't be in there. There's my test file. There's my data processor. Those two files already exist. And so I'm going to put the code here in this test file. This will become my little test harness. And the first statement is import. Like we've imported the pickle module, we're going to import my data processor module. The pickle module is something that somebody else made, and you were just importing it. There's a way of registering in Python the location that it will actually go through and look for that module. So if you don't specify, like if you say import sys, it looks in the Python's little notation that says, okay, where is it at? And it'll see if it can find sys automatically. If it finds it, great. It'll also look locally if you type in import sys, like we did when we were using the argument values, or pickle when we were using the pickling piece. But if you just go ahead and put the module file in the same folder, all you have to do is say import and the name of the file name here, and that will import it. Now, when you do so, you'll need to reference it. That is what they call the namespace. That's the name of the module. Dot the name of the, in this case, class. Go back here. I'll zoom in a bit. So the class is named file, and so I go through and make a brand new file object. I'll call it objp. I don't know why I called it P. I guess I should have called it F. I'll leave it at that. Probably I meant that it was a processor. And then I'll go ahead and set the file name to test.txt and some data. This is a test. And when I call the save data method of that object, it's going to be calling this method right here, save data, and the object. Open, dump the data in there, and close it. Print out some message. The message is coming from that save data, which is data saved. So I should now be able to run this and see if it works. Run. It says data saved. I can see this test file shows up. This is a test. It's in there. And if I go and look at the folder here, right click on the little module folder, and I go inside, I can see that yes, that file was made right next to it. Also, you notice that Python goes through and makes this PyCache. The first time you run a reference to a module, Python will automatically take that module file that you referenced, and it will go ahead and compile it into a compiled Python file. PYC, Python compiled. And this is the same code I had in that data processing, but it's been compiled. And you can see some of the same text I had in there earlier. Exception, Python reported the following error. Let's see. Explicit returns fields, module 9 data processor. I mean, there's some stuff in here that you can read, but most of it's obscure because it's compiled now. It's in a binary format. Now, once you have an application of a couple files like these working, you can take them and you should be able to put them in another folder and make it work. So let's say I come over here and I make a new folder. Temp stuff is Python is a good folder. I'll just paste in here. And if I double click on that test file, you can see that it goes through, it runs the code, and that code was to make a new object, set the properties, call the save data method, and end. And it did that. And it also made that little PyCache and compiled it again. So now that it's compiled, next time it runs, it'll be just a little bit faster because it didn't have to remake the compiled version. So Python is actually going to go through and take that code that you make in here, and it will compile it so that it can actually process faster. And with this, you can make very complex applications. You can see that the code for data processing could be in one file. The code for storing what a customer object looks like could be in another file. A customer class, a person class could be in a different file, employee class in a different file. And all of these modules could work together as a unit. Yet another way of organizing your code. Now, the module that kicks off the interactive part, the one that you interact with, is known as the main module. And you can check to see if somebody is interacting with it directly by going through and asking the question, is the name of the module main? If the one that is being started up, like right now, test py, if I go ahead and run that by double-clicking on it, I'm interacting with that, that would automatically become the main module, and its name, which is a built-in field in that Python can reference, its name will be called main. Now, we've seen this when things go wrong. So I'm over here and I do something, I don't know, stupid. Let's say I do this, and I try to run it. Let's see, module and module. I thought there was one where it's, now I'm going to try to make it fail, and I've seen it where it says in main module, or module main. Let's see, what can I do to force it to do that? Still no love on that. Okay, well, you're going to have to trust me. Eventually, if I keep poking around at it, we'll see where it says the word main. But the one you interact with is always the main. So, for example, let's say I do this. Print underscore underscore name. It says main. But watch what happens when I make another file. Let's see, give me another file. Now I'm interacting with it directly, which means that it's also main. It's the main module. At the beginning of class, I kind of talked about this concept of a main module or main method that things are running in. And I talked about how whenever you make variables like x, the variable made inside the module is part of the main module. That was at the beginning. It was kind of hard to explain it at that point, but hopefully now it makes a little bit more sense. So you can have a function that you've defined. And you can have a variable inside of there, but that variable is not inside the main module. It's inside of the function, and its scope is inside the function. This one here is out globally in the main module. And now that I say that, with your understanding of what a main module is, it probably makes sense. This is one of those chicken and egg kind of things that are kind of tough to explain at the beginning of class. But yes, this is a module. This is the main module. And one of the things you do is data processor doesn't actually have any code to interact with. If I go ahead and run this, let's go ahead and say run the data processor. It runs fine, but there's no interactive code. It just loads the class into memory and then it's done. So one thing that people do is check to see whether or not it's running as main. And if it's running as main, it means somebody's trying to interact with it directly, and you can raise an exception. You can say, hey, don't do that. This file is not meant to be ran by itself. It's meant to be a module that is used in conjunction with another script file, an actual main module. So now if I do this and I try to run it, I get an error message, and this is going to be true even when I'm out like in the folder structure here. So I'm over here in the folder. I try to run it directly there. Let's see, it's kind of coming up and closing. CMD. Let me go ahead and drag that in and hit enter. And you can see here, this file, exception, this file is not meant to be ran by itself. So the idea is, if you do that, then people try the other file, the main file, which actually can be useful. That one actually is the main file. That is the interactive one. Now, I think calling it something other than test would make more sense. But this is just a throwaway little script. It's my test harness. And so you just kind of use that to test to make sure that the module that you've just made is actually working. If you actually go through and create a main module that you want to work with, you can do something like this. Check to see if it is being interactive. In other words, people are using it interactively, and then, and only then, go ahead and do the import. So if they're using it as an interactive script, then go ahead and import like the data processor or employee module, the data processor module, comma, the person module, comma, whatever. And so that would go in my main script, the one that I would interact with directly. In this case, it'd be my little test py file. And now, if people try to import test py, it would say, hey, wait a second, you don't do that. This file's not actually created to be imported. It's made to be interactive. Okay, hopefully that makes some sense. What I'm going to have you guys do next is I'm going to have you do a little lab which kind of tries this concept out. Basically, you're going to be doing the same thing as I just did. You don't have to type it out by hand if you don't want to. I'll tell you more about it when we get to the lab, and that's the next video. But for now, hopefully this makes a little sense about what modules are, and maybe you can kind of see, if you think back, that we've been using modules for a long time now. It's just that modules that other people have created. Okay, I'll talk to you in the next video.